Hello, Brad here, just to say we're super proud that the Friday 5pm podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller, the UK's best home brew store.
We use the Malt Miller for all of our homebrew experiments, as well as tapping them up for advice and binging on their awesome YouTube channel all the time.
That's why whenever we release a homebrew video, we put a recipe kit live on the Malt Miller, so you can brew with the exact same amazing ingredients that we did. The same ingredients used by pro brewers.
So alongside the Malt Miller's nitro-flushed hops, cold-stored yeast and milled-to-order malts, you can pick up recipe kits for our 5 Points Best Bitter, Russian River West Coast IPA, and now the fastest beer in the world, a hazy session IPA that goes from grain to glass in less than 48 hours.
Sign up to their newsletter at tinyurl.com/Malt Miller to get 5% off your first order. With the Malt Miller's amazing customer service and Johnny's 48-hour recipe, you could order the ingredients on a Monday and be drinking the beer by the weekend.
Speaking of which, it's Friday.
It's 5pm.
So enjoy this week's Friday 5pm podcast.
Oh, I think it's got a yeast infection. Yeast infection.
Beer lovers, we are back in the flesh.
You've got to stop saying back as if we don't miss as many episodes as we used to, Rob. We're now...
I was mainly pointing out the fact we're in the flesh again.
Oh,
we're
I see. Yes.
No longer in the digital realm.
I'm looking at your beautiful face, even if our listeners can't.
You are, and we're sat 1 meter apart, 2 meters apart. What's the law?
I forget, but
Yeah,
whichever
but
one
it's
it is,
fine.
we're that far apart.
And we've been vaccinated. Yeah, we've got a brand new episode, one that I have been trying to arrange for a while, with Henry from Pillowheat. Got to sound pretty loose, this one, but give it time. Henry has a store on Carnaby Street above the van shop. I was first put on to him through his Instagram, and basically he collects really old vans. He's just a mad collector, and he loves this old school style of the brand. And Vans gave him this space where he could sort of sell and display his old vans, but he's really good on social media, putting up all the old pictures of the shoes and like telling the story. And I just thought it was a really cool idea that I know all the beer lovers out there love to collect. You either love to have old dusty bottles that you never drink. I know I do, and Johnny definitely does. And it just seemed like a really nice story that someone else that's as into collecting as all of us.
I think you're underselling this. Like this podcast blew my mind. That conversation with Henry. So I wouldn't class myself as a fashionable guy or somebody that's really into fashion. But if there was one item of clothing I really love, it is shoes, and I have a lot of shoes. But I didn't know any of the history of Vans until we started researching it, until we started chatting to Henry. I didn't realise quite the level of collecting that goes on of these, where he begrudgingly calls them sneakerheads, the value of these things. But also, I used to really be into guitars, and I'd always talk about, how the USA Strats are better than the Mexican Strats and all this kind of stuff. And this whole podcast was predicated when we started the bubble on the fact that there's so much in common between all of these different niches and passions, and it's so true here. The Mexican Strat is the non-USA Vans, which is the contract brewed Cloudwater now in Tesco, and just all these things where people are constantly looking for the most authentic, most original version of everything and then collecting it. And the stories in this podcast are just incredible about breaking into old houses because they saw boxes of Vans in the windows. The history of skating and Dogtown over in Venice Beach and all this kind of stuff, which is just stuff that you sort of know in your subconscious and are vaguely aware of, probably through Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2.
Yeah.
But just having it all connect up and realising just how fucking vital skate culture is to so many other cultures in the world, and what Henry does really stitches all that together for me.
So let's hand over to Henry and let's hear about some old sneakers.
I drove over to the Sonic Drive-In, ordered a jalapeno burger, washed it down with beers, beer, I said, Stone Cold, why have one when you can have them both?
So you're not a native?
No, I'm Sydney native, but English blood. So I got extended family here, been here 15 years. And yeah, that's played a role in how things unfolded for me in my professional life, because Australia's so isolated, and if you're a collector or a digger or whatever, you've got a limited landscape, and moving here, the vintage landscape just completely opened up for me. So I had this perception of what was available and what the horizon could offer. And, you take that step and it just,
It's massive.
Yeah. So it was really exciting and inspiring, and it took things to the next level. The obsession and the commercial potential that it was a viable option to try and make a living doing something like this.
Yeah, instead of just collecting, you were becoming like...
I mean, that was my hobby and always will be, and I'd be doing it if I wasn't running a business. But, big city opportunities, that's why I moved here, to try and make something happen or follow my dreams or whatever it might be. And it's fallen into place. So
was it collecting when you moved over, or was that very much just a hobby, and then did you have another day job, so to speak?
Yeah, I had background training, so I moved here with the plan to work in natural remedies in alternative health. So, but I studied that for 4 years, but my passion was always on my lunch break out to the charity shop or whatever, digging, So, and yeah, that was always my dream, but you needed a backup. And
at school, it doesn't seem like that's like a tick box option, like collecting vans.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, realistically, even running your own business, like where I grew up, it was like, this is what you do. You finish school, you go to university, you get a job,
doctor, teacher,
get a wife, have a kid,
and
that's it. And it was, running a business. Yeah, maybe apprenticeships were on the radar, but it wasn't really preached like that. So it just happened by accident. Like there was a moment where I started to buy stuff with the idea to sell at some point. So it was collecting, but with an ambition, be it an eBay store, a flea market stall, or a shop, whatever it might be. And it just happened to be a shop. I got lucky and met this guy, landlord, and he gave me a chance. Signed a 6-month lease, and 12 years later, I'm still doing it.
Always been the shop in Clapton?
I was in Hackney Central before the Clapton one, so on Wilton Way, I was there for 4 years. Derelict Street, there was nothing there. This was still kind of old world Hackney, and it's all been gentrified now, but that was the start of it. And so I was there 4 years, closed it down, found the Clapton space shortly after, was there 4 years, and then Vance gave me the chance in Carnaby Street, and I've been there 2-ish.
Talk about a rise of success. You've gone from Clapton High Road, and for our listeners, Clapton is a bit of a mixed bag between gentrification and ghetto. So is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, it was. 20 years ago it was no go, and it's been polished completely, but
it still has
still an edge.
Yeah, edge definitely.
Yeah.
And then Carnaby Street, which is like the top shopping street in, I don't know, the world.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the display in the window.
Yeah,
that's prime real estate. Like what a brand would pay for. It's just a narrow 4-foot window, but that is prime real estate. The amount of people under normal circumstances that would pass that and potentially see that, it's mental. And there's me in a video with a 40-year-old pair of shoes, sitting there. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But at the same time, feels like was kind of meant to be, and still I've got great ambitions, and it feels like the beginning in some ways,
Yeah. So was it always Vans shoes that you were collecting, or was there a lot more other things of that sort of ilk, and then it got streamlined or narrowed down into just the...
It was pretty much always shoes. I mean, as I guess when you think about how did it start, stickers is the gateway drug for my world. So stickers get you started, stamps, it wasn't, we're not the generation of stamps. Stickers, toys, and then shoes. It was kind of that progression. But it wasn't always Vans. Believe it or not, I didn't wear them as a kid. Like, they were around in Australia, but I was playing basketball and playing football and tennis, and I flirted with skating, but I didn't discover them until later. And a guy at school, he's like, "You should try the old USA Vans. They're much better, the quality, this and that." And I was like, "Oh," and he kind of planted the seed for it, and that was a pivotal moment, and kind of the point of no return. And after seeing Dogtown and Z-Boys documentary,
Yeah.
I implore your listeners to go and watch that documentary if you haven't seen it, because that changed my life, like, legitimately.
It is amazing. I actually watched it again recently because it came
Yeah.
up on maybe Netflix or something over lockdown, and I hadn't watched it in years. And
Yeah.
so we're going to give us a quick summary so those listening can
So this
understand.
is, I mean, the USP of that documentary was the birth of the now, and I think that's pretty epic. Like,
Yeah.
it's about the skateboarding revolution in the 70s, whereby the kids in Dogtown, Venice Beach, California, started, sidewalk surfing when there were no waves, the droughts in the summers and all the empty pools, and they just started skating pools, and it was happening in other places around the country, but these guys did it with such style and flair, and it was captured on film. Like, that is the wild thing. Craig Stesick was there to photograph it, capture it on film, which just resulted in the most epic documentary that Stacey Peralta put together. And the story of these guys' lives, like,
They're also young as well. Like,
yeah, they were
they're
just
complete
kids,
beach bums, like,
Yeah.
really tanned, really long blonde, sun bleached hair.
Yeah, from
And they're
broken
just
families.
so
Like,
cool.
it was rough, man. And then they were showered with fame and money and the story of their life thereafter. It's fascinating stuff. It's not even about skateboarding. It's about cultural, those moments in time that kind of change the world in youth culture or whatever. And that's what inspires me, be it music, art, film, youth culture, any of these things.
I think, it's pretty hard to overestimate the impact that time actually had. Not like you say, it's not about skateboarding. It's also culture, fashion, music as well. Like, heavily was codependent on that kind of culture as well. So as you're collecting, it wasn't just that they were better quality. Like your mate said right at the start, it was like, but wait, there's everything that came around it and trying to recapture that.
Added layers, The quality was the first thing. I like to wear old vintage stuff. I didn't want to be wearing the same shit everyone else was wearing. So one option was buying old stuff. You wanted it to last. I grew up playing basketball, and I had Nikes or Adidas that fell to, perished. There was dust. And I'm like, this is bullshit. I don't want to just look at it on the shelf. I want to wear this shit. So that was the, the springboard. But everything that Vans offered culturally spoke to me. I could relate to the Southern California dream coming from Sydney. So surf, skate, BMX, punk rock, snow, all these things. So yeah, that lifestyle was a big part of it. So it just added layers and really fueled the obsession. And like I said, I guess I was searching for something, trying to find, went through different brands that were kind of empty,
Have you got any examples of those brands who fell short?
Well, you think about athletic brands, and yeah, I was obsessed with basketball growing up. Like, that was the first obsession. But it doesn't really have the cultural relevance. It was just empty, commercial, yeah, these guys were great athletes, but there was nothing more. Whereas these skaters, it was the lifestyle, it was the music, everything that came with it. And yeah, maybe basketball had links with hip-hop and street culture, but it was just kind of empty for me. So I was looking for something with integrity and more substance, because I was always at odds with, I mentioned my background is in healing. It's in natural medicine, and they talk about renounce all possessions and, take your shoes off and leave the world behind.
And you're like,
and then,
these shoes?
Yeah.
No way, man.
So I always battled with that. So I tried to justify to myself, how can I get into this materialistic, pursuit, and somehow justify it as a,
as a cultural statement.
Yeah, or as a spiritual thing. That's kind of how I looked at it. And if it was done with integrity and had cultural links, then it was, I could justify it to myself somehow.
That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, I was fascinated when you said that, it started with you sort of rummaging around in charity shops. Was, I guess, years and years ago, there was no market for secondhand sneakers and stuff. So you were just going around and finding it in old charity shops.
Yeah, especially in Sydney, there wasn't much option. Yeah, I was part of the first kind of sneakerhead, hate that term, but that kind of boom. And yeah, the only options were, I would look for old sports stores. I would go to the yellow pages. Of course, there was no internet. There's no fucking hashtags or nothing. Yellow pages, look up tennis shops in particular, because, sports shops still existed. But it was old tennis shoes and stuff that I wanted to find. And often they would have old stuff,
It's like Fred Perry's and
yeah,
stuff like that.
like old...
Just dead stock that...
Yeah, anything, I found some John Newcombe, who's a famous Australian tennis player. Lotto shoes, like I remember finding this bin of old shoes outside this sports store in the middle of nowhere in Sydney and just going, oh my God, and bought a bunch of them. They fell to pieces, but I didn't care, like it was sick. So yeah, it was like charity shops, yellow pages, and then when eBay started, and I didn't get on it right away. It was until the late 90s that I'd started digging on eBay, and that was the end. It was.
And then you said when you moved to the UK, then that really opened things up for you, because obviously Australia is very isolated, whereas now you've got this sort of world of lots of different countries right by each other.
That's right. The European sensibility, the influence of Euro fashion. All the classic European brands coming out of Germany or France or Italy, availability was much better. So I remember the first sports store that I found this was bloody in Dalston, not far from here, walking in there, and the guy thought it was Christmas when I walk in and just like digging. I went digging through that place for 5 years or more and just found. For me it was incredible, but I quickly realized that you could find this stuff around. Like, I just wasn't used to it. So, yeah, he enjoyed that when I dropped all this money in there and fucking bought all the trash.
He didn't start upping his prices every time he saw you
no,
come through the door.
He was cool. he knew and he got it, and he respected what I was doing and how I did it, and
And he's probably just happy he's getting rid of a pair of
Yeah,
sneakers.
and happy to see me stoked on it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, for someone to recognise what they are. Like, he remembers them well. He remembers the names and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, that's a Pony NFL, you know, whatever it might be. So
early on, you didn't really mind like what it was as long as they were old sneakers.
yeah.
And then,
So by that time, when I arrived, Vans was already the passion, but I wasn't crazy enough to think that I'm going to specialize in one brand and just, you know, create this niche. I didn't think that was viable at all. So anything old, I would buy sportswear. And my partner, we went into business together, and he was buying homewares. You know, we'd buy anything. We were looking for watches, jewelry, homewares, you know, light fittings, electronics, whatever it might be. Our holidays would turn into digging missions, and we'd go to wherever, Ireland or Germany or France, and we'd like, where's the old town? And then we'd just be hitting up all these old shops. Opticians was one of the best. You know, he's Italian, so we went to Italy, and especially in the north, they don't really have an idea of vintage. Their fashion is very forward thinking, like next season, and anything that's old, it's like trash, you know, get rid of it. So every optician, and you go to some of these small towns in the middle of nowhere in Italy, they'd have a bar, a chemist, and an optician generally. So we'd go in there and say, have you got any old frames? And they'd open up a drawer, and we would find gold, like seriously, like Versace, any of the top brands, Persol, made in Italy. So this became, I didn't know shit about frames at that point. I had my Oakley frog skins and a pair of Ray-Bans, and that's it. But so I educated myself on all this stuff, and we actually considered specializing in that. We could have made a killing doing that, you know. Sunglasses are so small, you can travel with them far easier than shipping shoes. Yeah. And we considered going on the road and just town to town, optician to optician. And I still think it's a huge market out there. I mean, it's really boomed in the last 5 to 8 years. But that was just another pursuit, you know.
You just loved anything that was old. You were just sort of after to see if you could.
Yeah.
Was it always with the intention to sell, or was it just because you liked finding these gems?
Oh man, the priority was always my size or what I could wear, or you know, sunnies that I liked. But of course, yeah, it's stoking someone else out by making them happy. You know what they might be looking for.
Yeah.
So.
And then eventually you then streamlined it to just being very much a Vans-focused business?
Pretty much. How did it happen? Yeah, it towards the end of the Hackney shop, it was Sunnies and Vans that were the specialties. And
was that because they also sold better, or it was just your interest?
Both, you know. Like, yeah, people like homewares, and a shop looked, you know, the shop looked cool. It was kitsch and it was retro and all, you know, with oranges and greens and all that. But, you know, as a commodity and making money, and, you know, people wear sunnies, people wear shoes, like, most of the time. So, everything else kind of got filtered out, and then the Vans just took over. My obsession just crystallized, and it became known as that, and I decided to really push it as far as I could as the relationship with the brand grew. You know?
Yeah, and then so the Vans story is, because it's quite fitting actually, you were talking to you today, because the guy that started it, he was a Dutch guy, is that correct? And he passed away quite recently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Paul Van Doren, he died sadly maybe a month ago, and he was like 91, and he was the founder. Him and his brother and an investor and another friend started.
It was like a sole company, is that correct? And they made like the waffle soles, is that right?
It started as the shoes, you know, but they were engineers, so they produced the shoes, they produced the molds that the waffle soles were created from. So they did everything. And that's what was pioneering about what they did. Paul worked for another shoe company in Boston and then decided he could do it on his own, moved to California, and they started a factory to you operation. So, perhaps similar to how, your guys' breweries might work now, where there's a brewery on site and you sell on site. But I don't know if that was always the case. Was it?
No, that's relatively new. That came from America as well.
Yeah.
It's been adopted worldwide, yeah.
Yeah. So for them to do this as a shoe company in 1966, this was forward thinking to think that he could do that. Build a factory, put a little shop at the front, and cut out the middleman and do it all. You can react to trends. You could see kids wearing a certain color or whatever one day and go produce some the next day. It's ready.
So that's what happened, right? It was his son got into skateboarding and he drew the original logo and it sort of snowballed from there. Is that right?
Yeah, so they had nothing to do with skating or BMX or anything for the first 10 years. It was just canvas, casual shoes. They were making boat shoes for sailors and for beachwear. It was just a durable, good quality deck shoe. In California, that's what they wore. It wasn't like a trainer style. It was a deck shoe. But they were so well made. They were durable. They would last. They were cheap. And the skaters started wearing them for that reason. And yeah, they just happened to look cool. And these kids, the Dogtown kids, their mentors were the local surfers, in Venice. And they wore Vans. So they were like, that's what we want to wear. And then the relationship built with Steve Van Doren, Paul's son, who was really in touch with the kids, closer to their age. And he listened to them. He's like, these kids are wearing our shoes to skate. We should start to market to them. It was not, it worked that way round, which was pretty wild. They didn't start as a skateboarding company.
I didn't realise that. I always just assumed that, because I knew sort of where they were based, that they kind of moulded a tennis shoe for the style of the time for the Dogtown crew, and that was the shift. But I didn't realise it was actually the opposite way around, and they were knocking around.
Man, it happened by accident. It's fortuitous how it's unfolded. That Vans have become known as this gnarly, off the wall skateboarding, BMX, punk rock thing, because it started as the complete opposite.
Yeah, like
boring, fucking, no frills, deck shoes in 3 colors with a big thick sole, and so it was fortuitous how it unfolded, and I won't say it was luck because they listened. They could have gone, all these skate rats, wearing our shoes, forget them. We want to make sensible middle class shoes, but they decided to listen and go with it, and so it was the skaters adopting them that facilitated, how it unfolded.
Yeah, and then sort of fast forward an amount of time, they sold out per se, did they, or completely? Is that correct?
The company was sold
to like a private equity.
Yeah, in 1988 for the first time. So that's when Paul Van Doren retired, and things changed. The company went public, and a lot of things were lost, in my opinion. But it also allowed the brand to build to what it is today. I don't think it could have maintained, because everything was American made at that time. This old world vulcanization, which created these durable shoes that I loved. The quality of these shoes was amazing, but it wasn't viable to satisfy the demand, because there was a huge global demand by that point. So they had to go offshore, produce in Asia, mass produce, in order to build the brand to what it is today. So maybe corners were cut in terms of quality and integrity, but would the brand still be around today if they didn't take these steps? I don't know.
So does that how does that sit in your relationship with them, where you're sort of saying, I'm only interested in the old era when this stuff was really good, and you're sort of sat above them on Carnaby Street saying that kind of thing probably to customers, I guess?
It's an interesting relationship, and it's wild that they're kind of embracing it. You go on the UK website now, and it's me talking about how the quality was much, much better. But I never thought they'd do it, even in the window. I can't remember what it says, but, made in USA, available upstairs or something. And I'm like, this is mad that they're actually embracing it. Why not,
It's very unlike sort of big brands to get anywhere close to that. Like, they obviously don't want to suggest to anyone that there's like a dip in quality, and people love to say like it will never change. I know it's sold out, but it's going to be the same standards, and everyone knows it's bollocks. Whereas you're actually just saying it is bollocks. So much so I've got a shop upstairs selling 20-year-old ones.
That's right. Buy the better stuff upstairs, So I respect that. So it's always been an interesting relationship, because I'm just advocating the early stuff. Like, I'll only collect until 1998, which is when the last shoes were made in those factories in the US. Anything after that, I'm not interested. One, because I'll go insane trying to have every single thing ever produced, and it's impossible. And two, because primarily it was the quality, and that's when corners were cut significantly.
And I guess the exclusivity of it goes down as well. In beer, for collectors, the quality, the worth of it goes down as there's more and more bottles produced. Like Fuller's Vintage Ale, there's a couple of thousand in 1997, and they're worth hundreds. And then I think you can buy it in Waitrose for the latest vintages. So it's demand and supply.
Dilutes the like further or the closer to now that you get, I suppose, and you need to draw the line somewhere.
That's right, it's a fine line.
I think that made in the US stamp is kind of a really nice one for you to have. Like, the other ones are fine, and Vans have actually sort of stayed kind of true in the respect of, like, they only really make 4 shoes. Like, they've always made those 4 shoes, so like the slip-on, the authentic, the era, and the high top, and the old school. So 5,
That's
is that right?
5, yeah.
So like, they've always made those 5 shoes, and
that's their DNA, and it's probably always going to be like that.
And obviously there's different styles now, and like they make a load of pro models for skateboarders and BMXers and things like that, but it's kind of funny that this company has grown to such an extent, and they still only really make 5 shoes, and within those 5 shoes they're all kind of the same.
Yeah, I mean, stick to what you know, and they did that so well for 30 years. Yeah, they went away from it in the 90s when skate shoes became all puffy and bulky, if you might remember.
That's when I presume we were both at that age where we started wearing skate shoes, like the giant etnies that were just like wearing boats.
I had a questionable pair of Vans with an air bubble back in the day, and they were so badly made because they had like a spongy sole, and they just fell apart.
Yeah, so they went away from it, and thankfully they were able to rescue it with a few key decisions, but it could have gone terribly wrong. So yeah, sticking to what they know, what their DNA is, and what has served them well until that point.
Were you collecting by that point, by the time it stopped being made in the US?
That's about when I started.
Right.
Yeah.
So you weren't sort of conscious of the end of the era sort of.
I wasn't,
kind of
and I talked to a lot of people about it, even people that worked internally and collectors, like guys in Japan. And Japan were decades ahead of anyone doing this. Like, I'm doing this really 10, 15 years too late, because they were on it before the shift happens. Like, they were so into it mid-90s, early 90s, looking for 80s stuff, looking for 70s stuff, and they saw it as soon as production started to shift, and some people at the brand saw it and held on to all the last USA stock, observing the changes, the corners being cut. So yeah, some people were witness to it. I didn't know any better. But it was I started in like 98, 99, so there were still remnants around. Not so much in the shops, not in Australia at least, but So yeah, I never really witnessed that shift.
Is the owner then, that after he got bought out in '98, did he have any involvement in the brand, or was he completely removed?
So what happened was he first retired in 1984, and his brother took over, one who started it with him. But his brother kind of went off the rails and tried to become Nike, essentially. So they started making all these athletic shoes. They made tennis, badminton, volleyball, breakdancing, skydiving shoes. It was off the charts. And
So trying to find the new skateboard culture, maybe,
just trying to become Nike, like trying to diversify. He wanted to take over the world. You know, they were making a lot of money, but he got greedy, essentially. And he thought he could do it. He started producing in Asia all these, breakdancing shoes in 5 different widths and like 20 different sizes, and it just went to his head, and the company went bankrupt in '84. Really? Yeah, Vans went bankrupt in '84, and there was a lot of drama and a lot of scandal and family divisions between the brothers. And if you read Paul Van Doren's book, which came out just before he died, it's super fascinating talking about this. And the courts ordered Paul's brother out of the company, saw him as responsible for the failure, and brought Paul back in. So he came out of retirement and spent the next 4 years paying back every penny that they owed the banks, and they were in debt, like, how much was it, like 10 million, I think. And so once he'd repaid the banks, he then retired for good, and he didn't really have any involvement. So he talks about it in his book, whereby changes were being made, and he was still privy to it because his son was telling him what was going on. Steve was still there and involved, but didn't have the say. So he just witnessed from afar and kind of shook his head and had to, swallow it. Yeah.
So you can see why they sold, I guess. It was also, he wanted to assure its future as much as anything.
Its longevity, yeah. I mean, it could have continued at that kind of scale, local scale, but once the company goes public, the shareholders have greater ambitions for growth and profit. And yeah, they want to globalize, mass produce. So it changed things, but it also resulted in growth,
Something I saw, I was leafing through the blog that's on your website. We'll put a link to it in the descriptions. But I assumed that the collaborations that Vans were doing was kind of a new thing, like the peanuts and the different things. But I saw there was a blog, they'd done lots of collaborations along the way. Like I saw one with Coors, which looked absolutely awesome. So it feels interesting to me that they would pair up with very global companies even then.
Yeah. A lot of the collabs that you see these days have been done before, like 20 years ago, with the same brands. Right. Of course, they're diversifying now and doing Disney, Star Wars, like anyone you can think of. But a lot of them were done back in the day and was kind of under the radar unless you were super into it or from California or... but yeah, they pushed it. They weren't the first brand to work with other companies, but they were one of the pioneers of the collaboration, which is now, an everyday thing.
Because that's huge in the beer world. Like the brands are it's mainly breweries with other breweries, and sometimes you see some breweries diversifying and maybe doing it with a restaurant or even a brand. But like 2 breweries coming together and making a beer is everywhere. Like
there's standard practice,
a release
isn't
a week.
It?
Yeah.
That in the 90s especially, they were forward thinking on a lot of levels and always looking to establish links with established brands that were culturally linked somehow. Like Coors was linked with what's the vacation in Florida on spring break. You know, when in the US, all the kids go to fucking Florida and whatever, drink. So yeah, Coors and Vans. It's like that's the collaboration made in heaven or hell. All these kids just get hammered and in their Coors Vans, and they sell tons of them. So that's how it worked, and it generally had cultural links based on proximity, like Disney. Disney was around the corner from the first factory in Anaheim. Who else? MTV, you know.
I mean, that's an obvious one again.
Yeah.
It's sort of that alternative, especially in the 80s and 90s when MTV was coming around, and it was that sort of rebellious thing, and it goes hand in hand with like a skateboarding, well, that skateboarding culture, I suppose, of a subculture and youth, which Vans
That's
definitely
right.
is.
Yeah. So it feels like the collabs now are just, they're kind of running out of ideas and just clutching at straws a little bit, like doing Led Zeppelin. And I don't know if Led Zeppelin ever really wore Vans, or you know what I mean, but fuck, who cares? People are into the band, people are into the shoes. So yeah, they've done stuff with Coors, and a Coors shoe came back in 2016. They did another high top with them. Trying to think if they'd done any other beer brands.
Coors also did a collab with there's like a skate company called Brixton.
Okay, yeah, maybe I've seen that.
Coors did, and it was really like cool, like old school style trucker shirts with the little Coors logo on them.
So Coors is the beer of skate.
Oh yeah, who knows?
Okay.
But yeah, like very 80s sort of throwback, 70s throwback. But yeah, it is funny like seeing the Vans collabs now. They did like Toy Story ones and stuff,
Yeah.
but it is a bit naff. But it kind of surprises me. I've sort of seen the peaks and troughs of the brand over the last like 20 years of skating in the 90s and early noughties, when they probably had a big resurgence again, and then probably going off the boil a bit, and now like, I mean, even them having a shop on Carnaby Street's kind of nuts, because it is a sort of a brand associated with a subculture, and they're on Carnaby Street.
Yeah, they're a global giant now, and you know, they're a marketing company essentially. Yeah, they make shoes, but you know, their links with the Warped Tour, the huge punk festival throughout the US for 20 plus years, which has finished. But you know, that's how they kind of pioneered the name. Linked to events, linked to surfing, you know, Triple Crown of surfing, skate events, BMX events. So yeah, you know, marketing became a huge thing once they sold the company, you know, and that's what it allowed when it became public. So
I was just thinking about, I think, like the rest of the people our age, we all played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and that must have been a big moment for skate culture as well, having like almost out of nowhere in my head, like suddenly becomes absolutely mainstream again. Did Vans really capitalize on that, or did
not
you
directly,
as a collector?
but yeah, that was a huge moment to springboard skating back into the greater consciousness, and everyone played that. Fuck, I don't play games. Like I don't.
The same.
But suddenly like,
But
played
I
that.
played that, man. I loved that, and we sat and got stoned and fucking played that all night. And I'd never play anything else, but it was fun, and everyone knows Tony Hawk because of it, and you know, all the other skaters that they used, and even the schools in the game,
yeah.
and like they're all famous spots, you know.
Venice Beach. It is really iconic, because I actually played it again recently because they've re-released it for the PlayStation, and
Yep.
my friends got one.
Yep.
I'd never even played a PlayStation 4 before, and I went around and it came back so quick. And I remembered, like, I was always Bob Burnquist in it, and I remember
Sweet.
how to do specials, the one-footed Smith, the backflip, had it all.
We just did wall rides. We would just, you know how you could like literally skate to a wall. And
Yeah.
that's what we like to do. Just try and climb the walls as high as you could.
That's like old school style skating from
Yeah,
the dog
and
toy.
yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
grew up trying to do, wall rides in fucking 1987.
It's almost like parkour but on a skateboard kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I still think that's the sickest stuff, you know. Wall rides, it's so cool to watch. But yeah, skateboarding has always been like that peaks and troughs over time, and Dogtown was one of those peaks, mid-70s, and it boomed, and then it crashed. I think by 1980 it crashed again, and then mid-80s it boomed again when the Bones Brigade came back round, and
Back to the Future probably has something to do with it as well at some point, maybe.
Sorry?
Back to the Future probably
Yeah,
had something
these
to do with that
are
as well.
pivotal
Yeah.
moments in popular culture that reinforce, remind people about skating, and it'll be interesting if the Olympics does that again.
I think it's having it at the moment, though.
It
Like,
is.
I'm into that sort of side of it, and I think social media, like Instagram and stuff, is allowing it to happen a lot more again, and it blows my mind how good people are.
And
Like,
lockdown as well.
Yeah.
Skating boomed in lockdown. People were, that was something that you could still do on the street on your own.
But and like people, because they're sharing stuff and it's so accessible. Because like when we were kids, you didn't really, unless someone bought a video and you'd share it
Or
around.
your dad's camera.
Or
Well, that's
no,
what
but I
used
mean
to
to
do.
watch like good people skate.
Right.
It was like
Yeah, yeah.
that skate video, and I got passed around, and
Yeah.
that was it. But now you just go on.
Or
and you
even
can-
prior to that, where there were no videos and it was magazines, and
Yeah.
these guys from Dogtown, and there were stills, and that's all you had to go by. It's like, I'm going to try and do that based on
On this image,
one
yeah.
still or like a sequence of stills. It's wild. So yeah,
But now it's just so accessible, and you can just, and it's sort of pushing the boundaries because people are seeing stuff online and
Yep.
like guys doing huge handrails and gaps, and they're like, well,
Yeah.
I can do that. And now there's like 10-year-olds doing
yeah,
12
it's
steps.
normalizing all this gnarly shit.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And vans are like very, I think, pioneering in that, because skateboarding's always been a subculture, but then big brands have got into it, sort of Vans excluded. So obviously now it's like Nike and Adidas are big in it. Like Nike are huge in skateboarding now, whereas 10 years ago it was all sort of independent brands per se. Like they're usually owned by maybe a parent company, but it was like the sort of Vans and Baker and people like that. And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
kind of like, it's good and it's bad. I don't know how I feel about it. Like you've made it accessible, and skaters are getting a payday now, which is great.
Yeah.
But also it kind of fights against everything it stands for.
It
And the
does- it
same
can,
as
yeah.
the Olympics. Like, are they going to be drugs testing these guys?
Yeah, there's a lot of backlash about it. Does this detract from the art form? Like, who's gonna judge?
Yeah.
and who's, what are they judging? Are they
And
judging style? Are they judging like?
It's so subjective.
yeah.
Like, because if you were judging, you'd probably like them, doing wall rides and old school tricks.
Yeah, and
whereas
if he's got some old Vans on, like he gets like
extra
10 out of
points.
10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe they
So-
should score it like in Tony Pro Hawks. Like, do a manual for long enough, the points keep going up and up and up and up and up.
It's just constant manually.
Yeah, just between each trick. Yeah. So we haven't talked too much about what it's like to be sort of a collector in the modern world, because obviously in beer and coffee and wine, who are the people that generally listen to this, you've got new products coming out constantly. Whereas, is it diminishing the amount of stuff that's out there that you
Yeah.
can get hold of, or is there a real second, third, fourth market?
No, there's no second wind in this market. And I'm witnessing it, and yeah, it's an inevitability that the market is going to dry up. So it's really difficult for me to face the reality that what I'm doing is on a downhill slope, and I'm witnessing it firsthand, whereby I've pretty much discussed everything to obsessive detail already on social media, on my website. I've found an element, if not every possible shoe that was available, and I'm getting bored. People are getting a bit bored. So it's a difficult thing to face. Like, people want to see the best product, but it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, I mean, a pre-1998 Vans shoe is finite. Like, there's only so many.
Yeah,
and
it's a
you've probably
finite supply.
had a lot of them.
Yeah. And at the same time, finding this stuff, it's getting crazy expensive as well. And that people tune out when it's out of reach. You destroy the market. And maybe I'm guilty of doing that, pushing the prices, pushing interest, and killing my own market. So it's an interesting terrain to navigate, and I'm trying to find ways to diversify. Because there won't always be these old shoes to sell, but there'll always be the stories to tell, and this is where I want to take things. Doing stuff like this, taking my show on the road, taking a film crew on the road to capture the adventures, to the things I've seen, the people I've met, the stories I've heard, the product I've found. If only I could capture it on film. And podcasts are rad, but if I could take a film crew with me and capture the moments, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to take it. There's still stuff out there, and it doesn't have to be the adventures digging for shoes. I could go. I want to sit down with. I was desperate reading Paul's book. I was like, please, Vans, give me an audience with this guy so I can ask him the real nitty-gritty questions that he doesn't talk about in his book, and I think that no one else would ask, because I know a lot about what he was talking about, and even more that he doesn't mention.
Because you have met him, haven't you?
Yeah, I met him once, so I'm grateful for that. But it's sad to think of the knowledge that was lost with him. He's the last one left of that generation. His brother passed away 10 years ago. The other founder has passed away as well. So, the knowledge is getting lost. So I want to sit down with his son, Steve Van Doren, try and get as much information as possible, hear the stories. And I think people would eat this stuff up. You don't need to be into Vans or into shoes. These are human stories. These are human relationships. And
if Skate's proved anything, it's that it goes beyond just an interest in skating or shoes or fashion. It is.
Vans are so relatable as well, which is what I am sort of into them, but that's what I like about them. Like, everyone I know has owned a pair of Vans.
Yeah,
like at
and
one point in their life.
You don't have to skate. I mean, I enjoy talking to collectors or enthusiasts, and like, how did you discover it? And it's like, I saw Black Flag in 1982, and this guy was wearing these shoes, and it's like, what the fuck are they? And he found out they were Vans, and that was it. He was into them, and I'm like, that's so sick, So there's any number of ways that people identify with them and can relate to them. So I think it has legs, this idea to try and capture this stuff on film and focus less on selling these old shoes that are now, so thrashed, and the rubber's starting to die, and the prices are crazy. And instead just, maybe sell one pair of shoes every few weeks or once a month or whatever it might be, and focus on the storytelling. So, trying to diversify, because,
it's running out.
The supply will run dry.
When was your last, I assume you get like a big haul every so often and you'll find it somewhere. When was your last really big, I'm very excited about this haul?
There was a decent one. Big hauls, I've only had a couple ever. Like, the reality of it is mostly one pair at a time over decades and decades.
That's impressive.
And and the reality of a big find, I found 300 pairs in Kansas, in the Midwest at one point. But it looks good. A photo of 300 pairs looks amazing, and it really boosts social media and the buzz, and it helped to build my operation, like that whole thing. But often what didn't sell for a reason. All the big sizes, all the small sizes, shoes that are damaged, shoes that are just fugly and no one wanted, or narrows or wide widths, or so it's not as glamorous as it might sound. You got a big pile of boxes, buddy. So
I'll maybe rephrase it then. When was the last shoe that you found that got you really...
There has been a decent find, but I'm still kind of pursuing it, so I don't want to talk too much about it. But this is what I want. I've been planning a road trip in France for the last 18 months, and COVID fucked that up. But I want to...
So there's a find waiting for you, and you can't get there at the moment.
It's brutal. I mean, I know stuff scattered around the world, but the logistics of it are... Yeah, it's expensive to travel and find this stuff. I could just go and ship this stuff in France, but I'm thinking more about the experience as a commodity rather than, it's never been about money and just flipping for profit. I want to tell the stories. I'll tell a quick story about the last real exciting one was an Italian kid messaged me. He'd found a couple of pairs in the box, and I was like, sweet. Tried to do a deal, and I said, you got any others? And he said, I do, but I can't get to them. And I was like, what the fuck? And he said, yeah, they're in this abandoned house, and I can see them, but I can't get to them. And I was like, no way. And I said, don't move, I'm on my way. So I literally bought a ticket to go see this kid. And the story was his dad he was like third generation fashion boutique owner. Like his great grandfather had this shop. At some point in the 80s and 90s, his dad tried to buy Vans. This was in the south in Italy, where Vans has a strong connection in Italy, interestingly, but mostly in the north. So he tried to bring the Vans from the north and sell them in the south, but it didn't really translate, and they didn't really sell. They were also expensive. So they just got tucked away in their house. They subsequently moved house only next door, and the original place just became derelict, was neglected, and it was abandoned. So I flew out there, stayed with this kid and his girlfriend for a couple of days.
How was his English?
His girlfriend's English was really good, if I remember correctly. So luckily, because my Italian is shitty. So it was amazing, though. So we didn't have to fake anything. Like, I've considered doing that, subsequently. But it was an abandoned space and, dripping. And there's a short video I took my friend to capture it. And this is where the idea for where I want to take things came from. So, we just made a 3-minute video of this. But, walking into this abandoned space, dust everywhere, ceilings dripping, shit piled high of clothes from the 80s and digging through, and then these boxes kind of like glowing in the corner, and that was super cool. So it was only like 25 pairs, but the experience that came with that just escalated it to next level. And
what were they? What were the shoes?
They were mostly, so the Italian style, they were going for a lot of printed stuff, deck shoes, mostly eras, slip-ons, primary colours like wild stripes, and they were really cool. And late 80s, still when the quality was super high. So that was sick. I'm kind of hoping that this guy finds more, or, that's the kind of thing that inspires me, where there's an adventure to it. And it was amazing meeting this guy's kid. He invited me into his home, and his mum cooked for me, and we talked about life, and he's trying to start a band, and he's like, I need to sell this so I can buy an amp or a guitar. And I'm like, that's sick, man. I want to help you.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier handing over the cash, doesn't it, when you know it's going to a good place? Yeah,
of course. And I could have just sat home, PayPal'd the money, he shipped the stuff, but that's boring, I want to try and inspire people to go out and dig. People, not everyone's into shoes. Some people are into denim or military or watches or vinyl or beer or whatever it might be. But on occasion, you need to be re-inspired to continue that.
Yeah, why you love it as well, and that is sort of bringing it back for, that's why you do it. And
it reignites that passion, which, it's not always easy to maintain that in the face of like dwindling supply or restricted travel, all the bullshit that's going on now. So
I'm sure you get a lot of people in as well because you're on Carnaby Street, like, who just don't get it. They're obviously into the van store and then they walk upstairs and they're like, why is this guy selling a pair of shoes?
The reality of my world is people coming in and kind of just bewildered by what they're facing. They're tourists walking into the van shop. They don't expect to see a destroyed pair of shoes for £400 and this kid sitting there, you know, on eBay, and they don't know what to make of it. And yeah, I get laughed at and ridiculed, and so the majority of people don't get it. But it's not for everyone, and every now and then someone comes in and completely gets it. You know, spots a skateboard up on hanging that they had as a kid, and they're the moments that make it worthwhile, where they come in and, you know, you bounce off each other and it reignites it, you know. So, or they say, I've got this at home, or I know this person, and it starts again, you know. Opportunities, and that's what it's about, you know. Connecting with the people, connecting about the brands that we love and the culture that we identify with. It's good fun.
I think we can leave it there. I think that's a lovely place to end. Yeah.
Can I just give a quick shout out to Kicks Brewing in Sydney? My mate has just started this craft brewing company, and they got an IPA called Sleight of Hand, which has just come out of Sydney. So they're Kicks Brewing on Instagram or kicksbrewing.com.au. Check their website out.
Kicks is a reference to...
It's not, actually. I think it's kicks, like get your kicks, you know.
Right.
But it works right now. There's a tenuous link to shout out my brethren back home and their IPA. So
go check it out, Australian listeners.
I love that stuff. Been drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. Hops to it. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. Hops to it.
So I could have left that conversation rolling forever. I think I was sort of trying to eye you and going, we do have to stop at some point.
And another thing.
But I mean, what a place to finish on this whole idea that every shoe he sells is kind of a nail in the coffin of his business, because it's finite resources, more finite than coal.
Yeah, every sale he makes, he's just like, yep, that's another one gone. Yeah, I can't add to that one. Sort of setting your boundary was it 1998 and before is like what he needs, and sadly you can't go back in time to get them, so it will run out eventually. But I loved hearing the fact that he then wants to diversify and like tell the story. Like the reason, you know, we collect our beers and talk about beers is because we're passionate about it, and the reason he does that is it's because of the passion. And I think that's what we really need to take out of why people do these things. It's sort of for the love, and he wants to find like the quality and the search of finding these.
Yeah, I mean, in short, it's this idea that stuff that humans make, it's time stamped. Nothing lasts forever, but the stories do. And in humanity, we've known that forever. It's why cave paintings are fascinating. The people are gone, but the stories are still on the wall. And that goes forward all the way through time. And this is like that. It's like those shoes eventually corrode. Rubber doesn't last forever. And he's realizing that now it's the stories of finding that aren't only the only thing that's left to him, but it's the most relative thing. The stories of the guys at Dogtown, the stories of the people who made the shoes, and tragically they've lost one of the great storytellers in Van Doren, who's now dead, and he's got to kind of pick up that mantle and keep those stories alive and keep telling them, even if he can't actually sell you the shoe anymore.
Yeah, and it's piecing it all together and how like that culture has a cause and effect on another culture, and although not everyone listening to this maybe cares too much about what's on their feet, it's how that affected that, which maybe does then long term affect something that you're passionate about. And even with beer, like I'm sure there's parts of these subcultures that have had that effect. I loved hearing that story about when he started up his shop. There was a factory with a shop out the front, and it just reminded me of like brewery taps nowadays, which were all but gone up until 10 years ago. And breweries were just big old factories where you couldn't get into and you couldn't get out of. And, you know, you couldn't buy beer on site. And Van Doren opened up this factory with a little van shop at the front, and you'd go in, you'd buy your shoes and look at the back, and they were all getting made. Like, that to me sounds so romantic, because in the sort of fashion industry, I don't think that exists. Whereas we're lucky enough now that it's gone full circle, and we can actually have a beer and look behind your server's shoulder and see the brewers working away, and the fermenters and all the other bits and pieces that make that experience so much more exciting than the sort of faceless brewery in Burton-on-Trent churning out insert beer name here.
But even with that really close connection that we can have, and even, you know, as I said in the podcast, you know, there's constantly new beer being made. Even we found, so me and Brad, through doing the craft beer channel since 2013, we've realised that the most interesting, the most relevant and the most important thing you can do isn't a beer review. It isn't talk about what the beer tastes like, because also remember, beer changes year to year. It's an agricultural product. But what's really vital is the story behind that beer, which is why, like, the favourite articles I've ever written are like the story of Jaipur, which, you know, lots of people say, oh, there's a different beer anymore. We're like, yeah, but the story is exactly the same, and that's what's amazing about it. And I just think, you know, in terms of we need to value content a little bit more. I mean, even calling it content devalues it. We need to value stories more, because the stories will remain, and the material product that we're writing about, talking about, will be gone. And I think, yeah, really the stories and the culture that comes off it are the valuable things, which is a weird thing for a collector to sort of say and realise, because he's obviously the guy with most of the fucking material stuff, but he's the one championing the stories.
Yeah, so if you want to check out Henry, get over to his Instagram page, which is Pillowheat, and you can see like all the new finds that he has, and he's really good at like telling those stories in Instagram, and he'll have old pictures of magazines where the shoes were originally worn, and you can see it, and it's in the flesh in the 80s and how they were used.
Yeah.
Some of them do look haggard and cost a lot, but when you hear stories about him going to Italy to like find them, you start to realise sort of why the cost is there and the effort that goes in, and he's not even interested. I mean, he's the epitome of someone that gets high on his own supply. I bet you there's like no size 10s in the shop.
Yeah, so check out that Instagram, and also you can go to his shop, Above the Van Shop on Carnaby Street. It's currently open Thursday to Sunday, did he say? But it's going to increase as people actually start going back.
And it's
to
so
Central
well
London.
done. It is like a time warp, like 80s museum, and all the old T-shirts, they're all kind of washed out with bright colours, and he's just done such a good job in capturing that Dogtown and Z-Boys style sort of and feeling. So yeah, go check it out. He'll almost certainly be working there, so say hi to him and buy some shoes off him.
Yeah, absolutely do. And finally, also all the things that we talked about, or rather Henry talked about, we'll put links to everything that we can. So the Dogtown documentary, if we can find his video of him going into the abandoned house, we'll dig out that. So do check out the descriptions, and obviously our social will be posting that as well. Cool. Well, that's it for this month. We'll see you next month. We've already got that lined up. It's a very exciting episode, especially if you're into home brewing. So we'll see you then. The Bubble and Friday 5pm podcasts are brought to you by the nerds behind YouTube's Craft Beer channel. You can watch over 400 mini documentaries at youtube.com/the Craft Beer channel. And if you love what we do, support us via Patreon and get access to merchandise and our amazing Discord forum, a positive and welcoming space for everyone who loves beer, food and homebrewing. Love and beer.